All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. The whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good cape and line, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part.
Shakespeare, Neil. Shakespeare, huh? Oh, your poetry from the path has gone and went all high-browedness, he says, clinging on to some bad English for balance. Well, I thought it was appropriate, actually, because today my guest is Harry Borden, one of Britain's most respected portrait photographers, known for photographing the stars of the stage, and politicians and musicians and writers in a career that spanned over 4 decades. Alongside his wonderful editorial and commercial work, he's also produced some deeply personal documentary projects, including Survivor and Single Dad. We will talk about those projects. I'm not sure this week, actually. It might be next week, because there's a part 2. I wasn't expecting to have such a long conversation with Harry. And once we'd started, it just sort of ran. And at the end of the conversation, I said, can we make this a 2-weeker and we'll continue talking? So that was what happened. A lot of his portraits are held in our National Portrait Gallery. 100 are kept there. 100 form part of the permanent collection. That is not a bad figure, is it? I really enjoyed our conversation. I think you'll probably gather that from when you hear the 2 parts that we have on today's episode. The sun has certainly come out. I thought it was going to be a bit of a mizog day today, but the sun has shown its face. Let me just get a picture of where I am on the path. I'm walking along the Kenneton Avon, a little bit further down from where I usually walk. Here we go. Just a picture from the path. F4 sketchbook photograph on my X100V, F4, 160 ISO, 1/1800th. There we go. That's the path ahead of me today. The mailbag's pretty good today as well, if I say so myself. Michael Assman has a really powerful letter into the show called 209. Paul Holdorf has a photo essay about darkness. Sandro Carrera is lost in photography, or rather hoping to find it again. And Paul Eves has written an ode to his washing machine. Very Shakespearean, Neil? Not really, no. Plus, as you're about to find out, we find a new biscuit tin question and or pose one, and put the quarterly photo assignment from the last 3 months to bed, and issue a new challenge with none other than Platon, another famous portrait photographer, to set a scene or set a challenge for you for the next quarter. Give me a minute, and then we'll start walking.
You know, it's refreshing to find places online where creative people are simply sharing their work, ideas, and encouragement without everything feeling like it's a race for attention. That's part of what Art Helper is building, and they support this show, which helps keep these walks happening every week. Art Helper is a community for photographers, artists, and makers, with a live feed of artwork and discussion, artist profiles, creative networking, and a growing global directory celebrating human-made work. It's free to join at arthelper.com/sign-up. arthelper.com/sign-up. There's also a direct link waiting for you on today's show page.
Been somewhat of an interesting week. On Tuesday, I spent the day in London. Made, was that a squirrel, pups? There it goes, look. Huh? Oh, it escaped you. Yes, Tuesday I was in London. I went to Portobello Road. And then in the Notting Hill area, I did this, I had a conversation with a wonderful photographer called Wayne Critchlow, who has co-written a book about the Notting Hill Carnival and all the years that he's been photographing it. It turned out to be a conversation. We went for a walk to talk about the book, and something very, well, unusual and surprising happened not so long into our recording. Now, that might have been this week's episode. It possibly would have been next week's, had it not been for the fact I had such a long conversation with Harry Borden. So that now is a couple of weeks away, which gets ever closer to Carnival time itself. Also met up with a friend, Mercedes, from Mexico Mercedes. And we were going to go for a photo walk and perhaps record some odds and bobs. But we ended up just scouring the market at Portobello Road with her two wonderful children, reminding me of just how much hard work having children under 10 can be. You have to have eyes in the back of your head. It was a great day out. But then Tuesday evening, it all came, well, not crashing down, but poor old Barney, it's much, much better today, was suddenly very crook, as the Australian friends of mine would call it. He couldn't move very much. If you lifted him, he was squealing and screaming. And so we had a late night vet's appointment. Let's just call it a late night vet's deposit, because whatever came in money this week went out very quickly to the vet, because after hours calls are do you hear this, pups? After hours calls are very expensive. Yeah, they are. Yes. No, don't bark at me. I was not impressed. No, growling won't endear you to me either. You want a treat, do you? What, for flushing my wallet out? Oh, cheek. Come here. Come on. And so, yeah. But within 48 hours, he's right as rain again. Just wanted some attention, didn't you? There is a thought. We're not quite sure, because he wasn't showing classic signs of all sorts of things. Sorry, vet hour will be over in a moment. And one more? Go on then. And they were thinking, is it abdominal? Is it kidneys? Is it muscular? We don't know. And now suddenly he's right as rain, aren't you? God dear. Trials. So so it was a funny old midweek. I lost a lot of time in midweek. I did. Nice to be out on a walk, though, I have to say. The email address for the show is stories@photowalk.show. The best part of this show is the thrill of receiving those photographs you share from your own walks too, or the stories and pictures that have stayed in your mind, or, as is the case today, sometimes just a note, just a letter. That's as much a thrill to receive. Whether you've got a camera over your shoulder or your hands in your pockets, it doesn't matter. If you enjoy slowing down, paying attention, and seeing more than most people notice, you're in exactly the right place with this podcast. I am starting this week then by waving goodbye to a couple of features from the last month and a quarter, and setting you some fresh challenges in their place. Let's start with a biscuit tin question, shall we? Our conversation starter for letters into the show, in case you thought, I want to write in, but I'm not quite sure what to write about. So for June, we had, what would your photographic autobiography be called? Some amusing answers over the last month. So what would your photographic autobio be called? I have just a triptych more, then we'll have a new question for July. From Paul Friday, Neil, the title for my book would have to be Oops, on account of the cameras are broken, flooded and worn out. When you see a camera on sale described as having one careful owner, that was prior to it entering my life. One from Jeff Smeraldo. Always good to hear from you, Jeff. My photographic autobiography? Well, this has been carefully word-shopped with my eldest daughter based on taking photographs during family trips. Hold up, she says. Dad stopped to take another photo. And one from Kevin Briggs. I think we can all recognise ourselves in this one, Kev. My photo autobiography, Neil. It would be called Deleted It by Mistake. Very good one. So another random biscuit tin question for you, conversation starter. Send your answers to stories@photowalk.show. And it's this: which one photographer, past or present, would you choose to make your portrait? Perhaps you could tell me why as well. Send them to stories@photowalk.show. It's repeated on the show page as well. Right, that's done. Tick. The assignment quarter has just come to an end, and this month, well, the past quarter rather, the word was darkness, which initially Gail Hilliard, artist and photographer, had requested you to simply and boldly go and look up into the nighttime sky. But I did extend it slightly to embrace what else you might see, or don't see, for that matter, come the cover of darkness. Some super images. And it's really difficult to choose one for the prize, but the one I keep coming back to, which is my criteria really for sending out our prize, is from Paul Holdorf, which actually also comes with a short essay, which really did play to my tingling creative whatsits. I'd like you to imagine the following. That will help with this. Here we go. Wilderness, Neil, I can do that. The dead of night. Okay, am I on my own? Yes, you are. Trying to make a picture of the Milky Way, with the Montana mountains stretching beyond. I'll tell you what, I'll have Studio Neil read you the essay from Paul while you imagine all that. And then I will come back to you to set a new assignment for the next quarter.
Belonging. I belong to places like this. There are a few roads, but they wind invitingly through the mountains. They beg for you to go just a little bit farther, just a bit higher, because they know what's around the corner, and they know you need to experience it. Flowers abound in an array of colour that you would not dare imagine. They bob their heads in the breeze like lazy dancers on a hot summer day. If the flora is rich and thick, the fauna is wild and free. From the tiny voles that help aerate the soil to the great grey owls that hunt them from the air, from the mule deer that graze in the meadows to the grizzly bears that dominate the food chain, this is a truly wild place. There are vast meadows lined with stately fir trees. There are rocky precipices and ponds which reflect the grand landscape better than any mirror. There are dense forests protecting unseen wildlife, and there are windswept alpine ridges where stunted flowers take shelter behind the rocks. During the day, the whole mountain range is alive with wildlife and plants doing what they must to continue the existence of their species. Forget-me-nots sway in the breeze. Bees zoom about. Moose browse the willows. Beavers inspect their handiwork. And birds sing a melody fitting for such a glorious place. It's good to sit for a spell and just absorb the tranquility. During the night, a different set of creatures enter the scene. Some aspects of night can be frightening, but I believe we do darkness a disservice when we associate it with malevolence. Just as we need the relationship between light and shadow to create a great photograph, we need the cycle of day and night to create a balanced life. Now, I'm usually an early to bed, early to rise sort of guy, but when you're up here, you feel compelled to stay up and watch the stars come out. As the last shades of sunset fade to black, the stars begin appearing on the stage of night. It's a show that you do not want to miss. On top of the mountains, there's no such thing as a bad seat. Tonight would be a grand show indeed, as galaxies, planets, and a phenomenon known as airglow would be headlining the show. It's exciting to stand in the dark and wonder what creatures may be watching you. Up here, it could be just about any animal that calls Montana home. As lightning flashed far to my north, and the sliver of the crescent moon ducked behind the storm clouds, I began to capture the images needed for this panorama. While the camera certainly enhances what is there, I could see this scene with my unaided eyes. I didn't even need a flashlight to see around me, although I did admittedly shine a light around occasionally to make sure that I wouldn't become someone's midnight snack. Wild places, be they at sea level on a rocky California coastline or high above tree line in the Montana Rockies, make me happy. A place where every living thing has a purpose and is permitted to carry out that function. A place where the stars are as visible as the flowers and I can take the time to admire them both. A place where I can witness the sun greeting the morning with its glorious rays and watch it sink below the horizon on the other side of the sky. Wilderness, a place where I belong.
Now that, Paul, is fantastic. It really is. Thank you so much for it. It was like I was there with you, though I was a little concerned about the bitey things you were talking about. So I'm sorry I kept turning my head torch on and off, on and off, on and off, on, off, on, off. Neil, would you leave the torch alone? A few changes actually to what we send out as our thanks for the featured image. It was the famous not so famous flask. Though we're changing it up a bit to embrace someone who walks these paths with us both. If you've been with the show a while, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. There's a new show T-shirt. The first of which is the I Am the Other Listener T-shirt, available wherever you are in the world. And Paul, you will be getting the very first. It's going to be winging its way to you, as they say. So you'll need a new assignment, of course, for the next quarter. It's being set by former guest and incredible portrait photographer Platon. I thought this worked really well with having Platon and Harry on the show this week. So Platon, internationally recognised for his portraits of some of the most powerful people who have, and still do, walk this planet, and also for the way that he works very intimately with his subjects, very close up, searching for something in their eyes, I would imagine, or smile, or even the faintest movement in their face. And that's why I think this assignment for quarter 3, so July through to the end of September, will be an interesting challenge. Platon, what is the one word for the one-word assignment that you have set?
The photo walk assignment.
Truth.
Truth. That's perfect for you.
Yeah.
Say something about truth.
Well, you know it when you see it. You feel it in your bones. And these days, we really don't know what's real and what isn't real. Everyone's talking about AI replacing everything, and it probably will replace so much. But what it's also going to do is remind us how valuable something authentic and human really is. So more than ever, the next few years of our lives, I think, are going to be about our value of truth and human authenticity.
So, good luck. All the stuff you need to know to take part is on the assignments page, which you can find by going to photowalk.show, our website, photowalk.show. Never forget that on the show pages for the episodes, there are pictures and links and films to do with stuff what we have talked about. So photowalk.show, look for assignments or the tab, and you can take part in this quarter's assignment. Right, Harry Borden. He's always been interested in what lies beneath the public image, whether photographing household names or people Living far from the spotlight sometimes, Harry's work has consistently looked beyond appearances in search of something very honest, and the honesty is what he'll talk about within our conversation today. It's an approach that's earned him a wonderful reputation as one of the UK's finest portrait photographers, with very much an eye for revealing the person rather than simply recording the face.
Harry, thinking about your work, I often immediately think of the celebrity portraits first, and I don't want you to wince at that, because that's, of course, an important big part of your life, but there's so much more, and I'm going to use the L word, there's so many more layers to your work, and we're going to come on to the personal side of it. But when I look across your career, I wonder whether you've actually spent all these decades trying to answer the same question over and over. Who is this person? How am I going to get to them?
Initially, there definitely was. It was to sort of impose my sort of technical virtuosity onto them, get a result, please the picture editor. But I think that, at various points, I've had conversations with other photographers, and we kind of chew the fat about, how you progress. And I think that what I've realized is that the more you kind of are indulging yourself, and the more that you are playful and don't have any preconceived ideas, the more that interesting things happen. And certainly it's difficult to how the barometer by which you judge these things, the aesthetics, but certainly a lot of the really well-known pictures were never pre-planned. They were more about me being in the moment, feeling relaxed, not feeling under any pressure, and actually noticing something that you could never preconceive. I'm thinking as a picture of, it looks really set up. I mean, it's beautifully art directed with Kevin Garnett, who's a 7-foot-tall basketball player.
Yeah.
And, he basically, I had all these dummies. It was kind of unpromising because we were doing a fashion shoot, and he designed all these kind of ludicrous clothes. And at some point, I suggested to the stylist to bring along some dummies, a bit like Helmut Newton or something.
Yeah.
And he just picked up this dummy, and you have to look at the picture. I can send you an image or refer to me talking about the shoot on my channel. But I mean, it just made a picture that was extraordinary, because you had this 7-foot-tall black man lifting up this white, angry-looking dummy in profile, and they're sort of confronting each other, and it sort of has all these multiple layers of homoeroticism and racial elements, and those sorts of pictures are the ones that I really like, which kind of look as though they were planned. But I mean, that would be some art director that would come up with that on a piece of paper and draw it out and try and attempt to get you to do it. It's just noticing these things.
I suppose it's similar but not similar to the shoot you did with Tony Blair, where the second shoot, that is, where you felt more relaxed rather than the first shoot. And if we get a chance to talk about that, we will, because I do want to mention the word politician. But on the second shoot, you were able to walk around the back garden of number 10 and find that extraordinary, strange area where you just had the door and this telephone with Tony Blair in it. Yeah.
That's right, and actually it was the year before last. I was doing the first 100 days of labour for The Guardian, and so I found myself back at number 10 photographing Keir Starmer, and I just had a look around the garden because I was there all day watching, and just picking up sort of reportage imagery, and the door's still there. I mean, obviously the foliage is different, but yeah, I mean, I just indulge myself. I mean, I had photographed Blair, as you said, a month before or so, I think for a German magazine, and you always get shown into the cabinet room, and there's always a complete lack of ambition. Yeah. All the photographers end up with the same picture. There's a disproportionately large table in this tiny room that dominates, and you can't even put a stand up. And a huge fireplace.
It's the your heart sinks moment, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. No daylight. The sort of office lighting that you can't really turn off. And, it's just, I mean, I got myself out of a tight spot by using ring flash, because Blair had these piercing blue eyes. Yeah. And then a month later, I got the same commission to photograph Blair, but it was at the weekend. And because I'd been in before Alistair Campbell remembered me. His only instruction was that I don't photograph him wearing a tracksuit because he'd been running. Yeah. But I did, just because I don't like being told what to do. And my obligation is to sort of history, not to Alistair Campbell's sort of ephemeral concerns about him looking silly. And so basically, he was being interviewed by Andrew Rawnsley and Kamal Ahmed at The Observer. And I suggested we did it in the garden because it was a beautiful day. And that gave me the opportunity, while they were doing the interview, to do some reportage, but then on medium format, with available light, it was beautiful light, to look around and have a bit of a recce. And then, as I said, I just sort of find these spaces that have an inherent weirdness that you might photograph anyway because they're odd. And then if you can put the Prime Minister into them, then you've got something that looks like, Annie Leibovitz has done for Vanity Fair and has been planned, months in advance. I know that her shoots, the actual preamble before she did those amazing shoots for Vanity Fair, they were months in the making, and there was lots of money involved. But what I try and do that on a shoestring, just by improvising in the moment. And quite often those pictures have a lightness of touch. So he didn't give me a lot of time, but I didn't need a lot of time. It was all there. I had to just persuade him to come into that space.
Well, interesting and I'm sorry to rewind a little bit here, but you mentioned Keir Starmer. And I did watch your film about Keir Starmer, and at the very end, and I was driving at the time, so I couldn't write it down, but I thought I must remember that when I talked to Harry. So I was listening to that interview, and at the very end, it was just before he became leader or prime minister, one of the two. And at the very end, you said something along the lines of, I hope he doesn't disappoint us or disappoint himself, or I hope it all goes right, or something like that. I wonder what those words feel like now with the news that we have of the last week or two.
Well, it's funny because I just sent a text to, or a WhatsApp message to the guy that I dealt with, which was his sort of head of press. This was a young guy probably about 30, George, just saying, I found his speech at the end really, really moving. I did, and I'm a centrist, so I even would kind of see the logic in hiring, I don't particularly like him, but hiring Mandelson when you're dealing with a kind of landscape that includes these kind of grotesque caricatures like Trump, because you need to kind of speak their language, and Mandelson is good at being with millionaires and kind of finessing his way through. So I think it was a pragmatic decision that looked really, really bad with 2020 hindsight. That was one of the key things that he got wrong. There were lots of things that ended up being U-turns, but I'm not sure that I think the perception is definitely that he disappointed, but I think, he had a poisoned chalice, and very, very tricky, a whole series of things that were very, very tricky to navigate. So whilst I'm not kind of like George, I'm not his publicist, I'm an independent person, all I can say is that I found him to be a really decent person, and I'm a pretty good judge of character. I photographed some wrong-uns in the past, like Jimmy Savile or Max Clifford, people like that. And I found him to be. I don't really even need to point this out because, for instance, it's almost like he doesn't actually blow his own trumpet. So back in the day, he was the lawyer that worked for free in the McLibel case, and I don't know whether I only learned that through The Reunion, which is a show on Radio 4, which gets together. This was the case where McDonald's sued these two people who were living in a squat who were disseminating information McDonald's didn't want getting out, and they sued them for libel, and they didn't have any money, and a young barrister worked for free and defended them, and that was Keir Starmer. So he's not Boris Johnson, he's not a privileged person who basically just wants to lead an interesting life. He's lived his whole life in service to the country from what I can see, and he was impressive. And I do think it's really sad, and it'll probably be I'm sure Andy Burnham's a really good guy, but it'll probably won't be long before they start getting their teeth into him as well.
It all turns inward. Actually, you mentioned Trump, you started it, so I'll continue. And it sort of plays into a question I had about how you how you deal with famous people, be those politicians, be those superstars, singers, actors, whatever. And when I think of the hundreds of famous people that you've photographed, many of who the public will know very, very well, I would find it personally very hard, and this is why I mentioned Trump, and while we're talking about politics, I would find it very hard to forget who they are before I press the shutter and inject a little bit of what I think they should look like, as opposed to the true story.
Yeah, I think I actually got the opportunity to photograph Trump and turned it down. Believe it or not, that's one I really regret. It was just after I'd split up with my ex, and I was sort of focusing on being there for my children, and that's where the Single Dad book came.
Yeah.
And I remember I just had my fourth child, Florian, and I was at the playground. I can remember it like yesterday, about 15 years ago, because he's 15 now.
Yeah.
And I was pushing him on the swings, and the phone came through. And back then, obviously, he was just a real estate developer. But he was coming to Scotland, and Tatler asked me if I wanted to go up for the weekend to his golf course and do a portrait. That's one I really regret. But in answer to your question, in a nutshell, what I try and do is focus on having an authentic human exchange.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, and one that I think someone pointed out. I think it was a psychotherapist. We came to the conclusion, and my sister sort of would endorse this view, that my father, was an incredibly charismatic and interesting guy. He's Jewish American. He was in the Marines, and he was in advertising, and he was very great communicator. But after having had therapy, we came to the conclusion that he was a bit of a narcissist. Well, he was a narcissist, really. Very, very self-obsessed, and didn't have, appropriate parental instincts, really, with regard to us. But the therapist sort of pointed out that having a narcissistic parent is the perfect upbringing for somebody who ends up photographing celebrities, because you have to have this kind of hyper awareness.
Yeah.
You have to have a good instinct about people and be able to try and attempt to get their attention, even though they are very, very difficult to get the attention of, because they're constantly surrounded by acolytes and sycophants and so on and so forth. And so I do have an innate sort of toughness and belligerence in terms of my approach, if people are tricky. And also, I can resort to charm and, inveigle my way. I can retain the interest of most people for a short period of time. I do think Trump would have been really, really tricky. And there's a fantastic piece. I think I've actually photographed Ruby Wax.
Yeah.
She interviewed him, and I think he in some way triggered some very powerful response from her childhood, and so she was kind of completely enfeebled by the exchange and found it an incredibly tough thing to deal with. But I do think someone like Trump I would be able to deal with. My dad was American, he was a tough guy. That I was born in New York. I don't get intimidated by people trying to be competitive. It's interesting. I photographed Tony Adams, the Arsenal captain.
Arsenal and England player,
Yeah, he's absolutely lovely guy, and he's been through a lot, and I read his book. He gave me a copy of his book, which I read all about his alcoholism, and it's amazing that he was sort of going on 3-day benders and falling down pub stairs and then playing for captaining Arsenal in England.
I know.
But he said that he told me, we were talking about masculinity and competitiveness, and obviously Trump is ultra competitive. My dad was like that as well. I used to play golf with my dad, and he couldn't stand the fact that I beat him. He wasn't proud that I was good at golf. He just found it humiliating. Yeah. And Tony Adams said that when he's playing golf with other professionals, and obviously he's an alpha male, you don't really get much more alpha than being captain of England and Arsenal and so on. Yeah. And he said as soon as men now that he's sort of quite and enlightened, and he's done a lot of work on himself, and he's clean and so on. He said as soon as men go into that competitive mode, he just stops keeping score in terms of the golf. He just zones out, because he's not interested in that innate competitiveness that we're, I think, inducted into as men growing up in society. A lot of the time we realize, maybe mistakenly, that we're in competition with all other men. And I've certainly been like that when I was younger, in terms of, and it probably helped me climb this greasy pole of professional photography and end up photographing celebrities, because I was quite a competitive person, and still am to an extent, but I am more self-aware now. So I think actually my skills in navigating these big egos are probably more finely tuned, and as I say, the pictures are more authentic because I'm no longer stamping people with technique, and rather I'm actually trying to sort of get something that's lighter, a lighter touch and more kind of revealing, but not consciously, just because it's a more enjoyable way of spending time with someone, having that authentic human exchange.
I remember reading the Tony Adams book myself, and you're right how much he has changed. It's interesting as well that there feels to me like a book exchange going on during many of your photo shoots.
Yeah, I did. I gave him a copy of my book.
I thought you probably would as well. You gave Russell Brand a copy of your book, and you said he rather sort of stepped over it, and of course, when it comes to narcissism, there's a story all of its own. I know we have to be very careful about talking about Russell Brand because there's a court case coming up.
Absolutely. Innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, I talked in the video that we made. I just talked about having photographed him. I think it was in 2017, and my book had just come out, and so it was about. My first book was Portraits of Holocaust Survivors, and so I bought a copy. Yeah, so I brought a copy along for him because I kind of I was trying to cultivate a goodwill and create a sort of positive ambience, and it's a really good calling card. I used to sort of show people a little portfolio on my phone of other famous people, but I've noticed over time that that's sort of okay, but it's much more powerful if you can sort of draw people into your world in a very personal way, and so show them something that's sort of a historical artifact that you've attempted to create. I'd watched his transition from rather frivolous caricature on Channel 4 to doing his podcast Under the Skin, and he interviewed some interesting people, and I've got to say I was taken in, and I wanted to be part of the world of Russell. I did, at that time. I remember he was being interviewed by some credible people, and he is a great communicator. There's no question about that. And it kind of basically I just brought along a copy of my book, and then it was very revealing that I just got a sense that he was kind of really consumed with the world of Russell, which is I can deal with, and I did roll with that, and both myself and the journalist, I think it was Miranda Sawyer, we just went into Russell world, and we went on that roller coaster, and I got my pictures and she got her piece. I mean, the piece she wrote, doesn't actually. I reread it for the video, and it doesn't age well, but it's interesting. The photographs, on the other hand, are kind of a moment, and I don't feel that. Photographically, it's much more difficult to lie to the camera somehow in a way than it is to sort of cultivate a goodwill with a journalist or impress a journalist or whatever. Because the thing is, objectively, Russell Brand is impressive when you meet him. He's a big guy. He's incredibly handsome. He's incredibly loquacious and communicates in a very compelling way. So it's very tempting just to sit back and listen. But when you're photographing, you invariably, if you're kind of calm and you retain a sort of cerebral detachment, you can somehow, even though you're not aware of it at the time, pick up something that is revealed over time. I mean, and a good example of that was Oscar Pistorius, who I photographed in 2011 at the height of his fame, where he was the world's darling. He represented Paralympian kind of can-do approach, and it was really kind of was the figurehead of the Paralympics being given a much higher profile. And the pictures are terrific. I quite liked him. I didn't think he was. I just think he was a guy that was out of his depth and probably had very high testosterone, and also was with a woman that made him feel very insecure because she was probably more intelligent than him. I think she might have been a couple of years older, but who's to surmise But it's interesting. One of the pictures I took, and I think I did a video about it. I'm not sure if I've done a video about it. I've definitely talked about it. There's a dark undercurrent in this particular image, and I was giving a speech, and someone in the audience pointed out his shadow looks like a woman, sort of almost in praying for mercy or whatever.
Oh my word.
And it's really, I mean, that's very literal, kind of Easter egg there in the photograph. But there's a dark undercurrent in the pictures. The pictures that I like now were never used at the time. But quite often when you're photographing these people, something kind of comes through the ether and sort of manifests itself on the dead digital sensor or the film that in years to come is quite interesting. Same with Jimmy Savile, actually, because I didn't know that he was a monster.
Even though at that time, I suppose there was when you photographed him, there was so much chatter, wasn't there, behind there? And I happened to have worked in a building where I had an office 2 doors down from him, and even though he was no longer employed in that building, he still had his office, and he still had this clutch over people, and it was this weird. I mean, we could do a whole conversation about Jimmy Savile, but let's try and avoid that. The idea, and you kind of mooted this a moment ago, I do think some people, and perhaps as celebrities in particular, politicians definitely, have become more picture literate, and just how much it can make or break a career or a week, because that's a long time in politics for many people. I think there's a certain fear, isn't there, of a photograph now, because you said it there. You said that when a journalist talks to somebody, there's a whole story to read through and pick apart. When a photographer makes a picture, well, you could just say, "I've got it now in 1/400th or whatever you shoot in," and you've told a story about them that they can't see until that article comes out. I wonder if there's a slight fear factor.
I think that it's best exemplified with David Cameron, because a friend of mine, a guy that I was a neighbour of in Hackney, did a really brilliant series of pictures called and he was made into a book called Tory Story. Right. He's now a documentary maker, and he's sort of drawn a veil over his career as a photographer. But he was contacted by David Cameron, and this is sort of over 25 years ago, and David Cameron wanted to buy all the pictures that he'd made during this actually quite critical look at the Conservatives. But David Cameron was a PR guy, and he realised the power of photography. And then going forward to my shoot with David Cameron, and I think I did a video about this, it's quite interesting. I turned up at his house really early in Oxford, near Oxford, where he lives. And Samantha Cameron sort of came to the front door, and she was sort of slightly sexily dishevelled in her dressing gown, and it's very early, and I'll make you and your assistant a cup of coffee. And we had a nice cafetiere. And then about an hour later, we were just drinking our coffee and sort of thinking about where we were going to do the pictures. About an hour later, the journalist Polly Vernon, who did the piece, turned up, and she answered the door in exactly the same way. And I'm not saying that this was preordained, but it did look, and she'd said to us, "Oh, Dave's taking the stuff to the recycling tip," right. And similar, she gave the same explanation as to why David Cameron wasn't there at that point to Polly Vernon. And I did wonder whether this they were writing the initial paragraphs of the piece about how normal the Camerons are, when they're not normal at all. David Cameron, when he was a kid, had friends that were so rich that they chartered a private jet and went to New York for the weekend. That's on the record. He's incredibly privileged. And so the idea that they obviously have there are glimmers of normality, but there's also incredible privilege there. They're the 1%. But I do think that they are acutely aware of the sort of the way they're perceived. And then on the other hand, you've got Boris Johnson, who in a kind of there's a degree of self-awareness that he realizes that actually to try and control it looks bad. And so when I photographed him, he, as everyone who has photographed him will confirm, he's disheveled and messy, and he appears flustered and not in control and so on, and just improvise. I think there are two approaches. They're both very, very savvy as to how they're perceived and what their brand is, but I think Cameron goes for control, controlling the minutiae of every detail, and whereas Boris is more of an improviser, and I can relate to that because I'm more of an improviser. So I have done shoots which might appear quite amateurish, when I'm chatting to I remember photographing Joanna Lumley, and I photographed her a few times, and so I turned up to photograph her with her son for Relative Values, which was for the Sunday Times.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen her for a while, and a lot had happened. I'd sort of got divorced and then got remarried. Well, not me remarried, but I met someone and was having a child with them, and part of my shtick is I don't have any barriers. I'm quite happy to talk about anything. I'm quite happy to just see throw the cards up and see where they land. I'm not in any way embarrassed about any aspect of my life. My kids find it very embarrassing, and on the channel Fred, which I do with my son Fred, in case anyone hasn't seen it, he's constantly having to edit me out, because might embarrass. He thinks it's embarrassing. So, for instance, we did a video about Gillian Anderson, and I made a comment about the fact that she had a tattoo on her ankle, and I bet there'd be an interesting story behind that tattoo. And Fred edited that out because he thought it was icky, which is like his generation. He thought it was a bit ick. So, that's. I'm like Boris, in terms of the way I interact with people. I tend to kind of think that it's much more authentic just to kind of, tell I'm pathologically incapable of lying, and I will basically just try and, as I say, be authentic and have an authentic exchange with people. It's much more fun. And so I'd say celebrities fall into those two categories. And I think the ones that end up being really successful are the ones who realize that ultimately it's like life is complex, and ultimately you can't control anything, so it's much better if you can kind of be like a jazz musician and improvise.
And Harry Borden is back for the second part of his conversation soon, and the third part, perhaps even a 3 and a 4, it's still in the edit. You can hear on next week's show. Right, back to your letters in a mo. First up, I'm going to tip my cap, or is that doff my whatsits, to our sponsor who make this show possible. Just give me a few moments, if you will, with your lug-holes, and let me explain why this is so important. Because they believe in standby as one of the first of the morning's pinstriped expresses go by. Have you gone? Stand by for the word print.
Well now, I would hazard a bet that most of us have photographs sitting on hard drives that mean something to us, something special. Photographs we've travelled to faraway places for, or moments of quiet, like the photographs we make in nature, or the very loud and noisy ones. We have these amazing photographs, but we've never really done anything with them since, well, who knows. But they just sit there, on the hard drive, looking at you. And that's one of the reasons I like Silver Grain Press. They specialise in helping photographers turn our digital files into something tangible. Beautifully made photo books, exhibition quality prints on Hahnemuller paper, using pigment inks and solid hardwood frames that give your photographs a permanent place beyond a screen. If there are pictures you've been meaning to print, perhaps this can be the nudge. Visit silvergrainpress.com. That's all one word, silvergrainpress.com/photowalk, where you will receive 15% off your first order. That's silvergrainpress.com/photowalk.
So, we've had a few weeks where the show's been out on the road, haven't we? And there's more to come, of course, not least Mongolia in September, Venice in November, my walk around Notting Hill with Wayne coming up in a few weeks' time. It's only a matter of weeks since we were in Scotland as well for our 2 Scottish specials. And one of our guests, Michael Assman from Germany will be back to join us for the Scottish retreat in 2027. The first week, which is about photographing and writing and photographing, journaling and photographing the most beautiful parts of the Highlands. We did feature some written moments in the Scottish week this year, though, and it was from a conversation that I shared with Michael that week that we talked about something he'd just written. And as much as anything, I think this that Michael has very kindly and generously sent in talks, I think, vividly of the importance of walking and journaling, and how important remembering those sort of things is in our lives, be that with a camera or a pen. This is called 209. Today, writes Michael, 20 years ago was the day my father turned 54. He didn't know then that this would be his last birthday he celebrated among us, and neither did we. There were supposed to be many more, because dying at a young age was something you'd hear about only from other families, wouldn't you? For most of the past 20 years, I had just to cope with the fact that my sister and I didn't have a father anymore, and that my mother had lost her husband and was now living without a partner. Over the past year, though, another feeling had settled in and had started to generate a new set of thoughts around the fact that I was approaching that age myself. If I remember correctly, it started in summer 2025 that I felt I had to sort out my thoughts and my feelings. My wife and I were on a hike across the Alps. It was the first time for us and very revealing. The mix of long-distance hiking in higher altitudes and sometimes rough landscape provides you with enough time to think about your place in the world and the meaning of life. Walking one step after the other for miles with a focus on where to step and keeping your balance helps to clear your mind and works like a meditation. It was then that I realized I was just about 1 year away from outliving my father. My last birthday set another mark when I turned 54 myself, and that day I'd already calculated the day when I would survive my father. The number of days left for him after his last birthday was certainly less than 365. So what would you do if you knew how many you had left? How would you use them? These questions were starting to spin in my head and haven't stopped. Since then, there's hardly a day where I don't think about what it would mean to have him around as a grandfather to our kids, a loving husband, and a father of a grown-up son. I realise how I miss an exchange with a person who brought me up and who set standards to which I try to live up to. Hopefully, I have many more years in front of me. I'm looking forward to sharing them with the people I love and contributing to the causes I deem important. So today, there will be 209 days left until I outlive my father. I want to use this time to remember and honour my dad and promote the values that he's given me and celebrate life. Michael, that is an extraordinary letter. I didn't feel like I needed or wanted to come back off the end of your letter. I just wanted your words to be the ending of that segment. It really was so very powerful, your thoughts, and resonated with me in particular, with the loss of my own father. Wow, the second part to come in a moment from Harry Borden. Next week we get really very personal, actually. Very personal indeed, although I have to say, so far what you've heard is a very personal account of people that he's photographed as well. Here is a letter from Sandro Carrera, just underlining the international footprint of our very special community. Hi Neil, says Sandro. I'm a regular listener of the podcast, and it often accompanies me during my photo walks here in Funchal, Madeira. I wanted to write because I've reached a point in photography where I honestly, Neil, feel a bit lost. I've been shooting for almost 20 years. I'm an enthusiast, mostly focused on street photography, and despite all this time with a camera in my hands, I increasingly feel like I'm getting worse rather than better. Fewer photographs feel meaningful to me. I don't see much evolution in my work in terms of the storytelling or the emotional depth. Technically, the images are usually fine, proper exposure, sharp focus, decent composition, often the sort of textbook street photos that we probably all recognise, but they just feel empty. They feel soulless, like exercises rather than expressions. I think part of the problem is a lack of focus in the broader sense. My photographs don't seem to speak to each other. One day it's architectural details, another it's people crossing through dramatic light, another it's random street moments. I feel stuck photographing visual cliches that no longer excite me, even while I'm making them. So recently I went back to shooting film, hoping that it might feel like a breath of fresh air. Instead, though, I realised I was mostly taking the same photographs, just in a more expensive way. I don't really have projects, unless a blog with random photographs counts as one. And to be honest, I'm not even sure I fully understand what a photographic project really is. I also have a normal 9-to-6 job that I genuinely enjoy, so photography exists in the spaces that life allows. It's something deeply personal to me. It's just not a career ambition. But now at 40, I'm starting to wonder whether I've truly had a creative voice at all, or whether I've simply spent years reproducing what I've seen others do better. I photograph for myself, hoping to see some trace of what I feel reflected back in the images, but I keep arriving at the same place. So I guess my question is, what am I doing wrong? Or maybe a better question, how does someone move beyond competent but emotionally empty photographs? Thanks for the podcast, for the countless walks that we've made together. All the best, Sandro. And by the way, I shall leave a link to Sandro's work on the show page today, as I will have done with Michael Assman's work as well. I'll leave a link to Sandro's website and his Instagram, so you can go and appreciate the sheer breadth of work that he does have. And I think that's somewhere where I'd like to start. Now, don't raise your eyebrows when I say this, but I am no Sean Tucker, who at these times, I just know this because I've spoken to Sean so often, moments like this, I just know he would have something very pertinent to say that's wildly wise. I know it, but I'm going to do my best. Hold on, let the Pinstriped Express go past. Oh, that's a quickie today. So, I feel like I'm winding myself up for something. I did just say the word breadth, and that is where I am starting. I think I did mention this. I met a friend in London during the week, Mercedes, and I remember saying something to Mercedes when we were travelling in India this year for the India special. It was that I felt like I was a collector of life in terms of my own picture making. I wasn't expecting every single one of my frames to be to use modern parlance, banger at all, but I did feel that I was collecting all this stuff that would one day be more important to me than it ever could be now. And I think Mercedes quite liked that and promised to claim it as her own or something like that. But but it's true though, isn't it? We are collectors, and what we collect can't always be grand statements. And sometimes for whole swathes of time, I do as well, Sandro, just keep making photographs of the same old thing. I mean, here I am today along the path, the Kennet and Avon Canal path, and something happened to me that I will tell you about in a moment. I made a quick snatch of a photo at it when it could have been so much more. So let me make another picture. Here I am along the path. But this picture I'm about to make, well, I've done it 1,000 times before. It ain't big, it ain't clever, but it's part of my sketchbook of life. It really is. It's not necessarily inspiring, that picture that I've just made, but it's existence, and that's what I think it is, existence and experience. And I know that can sound a bit, oh, Neil, that's a bit vanilla, but that's precisely what these photographs are. I wish I had been making existence and experience photographs, no matter how good or truly ropey they probably would have been, when I was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, when we had all these locations I talk about in my birth town, or the town where I grew up at any rate. Those things that now I think, I wish I could see what that looked like. And honestly, as good as the internet is, I can't always find them. And, I certainly can't find the places I want to remember. I can find what other people wanted to remember, but I can't find what I wanted to remember. So, isn't every photograph just an encounter, a small encounter, if you like, with the world? Most won't change your life. Of course they won't. The one I've just made won't. That's for sure. But they are maturing things, photographs, and they come back later to remind you that you were here in this world. I often say that to people when I'm photographing at weddings. They go, oh, I don't like my photo being taken. I say, well, it's a historical document. Let's just do it quickly. It doesn't have to be a Vogue-like thing. I saw the Joseph Koudelka book the other day. Neil Ford brought it round to show me. It's called Diaries. You get to spend time inside Koudelka's head through his writing, which is one thing that I really love about that book. And, well, not all the photographs, clearly. Not going to make a grand statement like, oh, the photographs were a bit ropey, because they weren't. They were from Koudelka. But there were a few that were very ordinary, disarmingly ordinary at times. But what I love about that whole work that he's done, this Diaries book, some of it was very ordinary, and I celebrate it for that. I really do. It's an exquisite book, by the way. I shall leave a link to it. Small diary moments of remembering what he wore. His feet on a dashboard, a sleeping bag. And actually, that is the stuff of life. Not big, not clever, no, but fascinating. So I'm thinking, Sandro, that you might have to take your foot off the gas in terms of expectations. And I don't want that to sound like I'm patronising you. But sometimes just embracing the journey, as they say, can bring you back on course. There's nothing soulful about a picture of a sleeping bag, but when Koudelka made it, you think it is. But actually, it's a picture that you, Sandro, or I, could have made. And I'm going to quote another book. I did note this down. This is important, this one. I've been listening to a lot of interviews and things, it seems, about this one. It's a wonderful book on writing called Bird by the American author Anne Lamott. It's become something of a classic, this book has, because it's not about grammar and technique or in our case, composition, I suppose. It's about getting unstuck when creativity seems to have deserted you. And, writers can talk about that for an eternity. The title, Bird by Bird, is quite interesting because it comes from a story she tells about her younger brother, and I think it's very pertinent to what you've written in and to what I'm trying to, hopefully not too clumsily, get across to you. When her younger brother was about 10, he had to write a school report about birds. He had about 3 months to do it. But, and this will sound familiar to a lot of us, certainly to me, he left it until the night before. And surrounded by loads of books and I would imagine completely overwhelmed, he sat at the kitchen table on the verge of tears until his dad put his arm around him and said, "Bird by bird, buddy. Take it bird by bird." And that became the central idea of the book. It doesn't have to be all grand gestures, just one step at a time, and almost celebrate the times when it does feel a bit ordinary. I'm thinking Sean Tucker, if he were along this path right now, just hiding in the bushes just up here, I'm hoping that he might have approved of that advice. Sean, was that good advice? Will I pass the Sean test? And before I introduce Harry, back for part 2, That photograph I was talking about a moment ago, we were walking along, and I thought, that's a horse on the towpath. That's a blooming big shire horse, that. Huge shire horse. And it was drawing along, old style, a canal barge. So before the days they were powered by engines, chuffing along, this was being drawn by a horse, pulled by a horse. I thought, I've got to get me a picture of that. And I completely stuffed it up. Now, part of me, to be fair, was shoved into a bush as far, because the path here is not very wide. If I separate my legs here, careful Neil, that is the space that we have, and I am no yoga person, as you know. So I was really having to push myself into the barge, and not the barge, the bush, hoping that Barney wouldn't be having a Barney and barking at the horse. He was well behaved, was Barnes. And I took a frame, but I didn't get the whole story. I needed to get the rope that was pulling through the reeds that are just to my left here, pulling that barge. You could just see just the tippity top of the barge going past. Completely missed it, Sandro. Completely missed it. But I do have the horse. We'll see if it's a good photo when I get it back later on, and perhaps put it on the show page. Right, yes, back to part 2 of my guest this week. Here is Harry Borden.
I want to mention Boris. Is it true, by the way, first of all, it's a simple yes or no really on this one. A journalist friend of mine said he always ruffles his hair just before the photographer takes the first picture. So a re-ruffling of the ruffle.
I think it's probably like a nervous tick.
Oh, do you think so? Okay.
Yeah, I think you end up, when I remember doing Richard Branson, and he's actually quite nervous about being photographed, in spite of the fact that he was one of the pioneers in making himself full and out front the kind of part of the brand.
Yes.
That what is Virgin, you're kind of buying into Richard. And I like Richard Branson, even though he's probably, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories about him and Epstein or whatever, but I found him to be a really good guy. Incidentally, going back to Keir, I should also point out that when my picture of Keir Starmer got into the Taylor Wessing last year, which is a photographic portrait competition at the MPG, I got a letter from his office congratulating me.
Wow.
And I got my picture of Tony Blair was similarly lauded or got into the exhibition. And, obviously I didn't hear anything from Alistair Campbell. So I think that he didn't have to do that. I thought that was a nice gesture. I mean, it's not like we've worked together since, or he's kind of he owes me anything.
I know you were very proud of the politician photographs that you've taken, particularly your prime ministers. It's a pretty much a who's who of the prime ministers, certainly of the modern generation. You weren't quite so kind about Truss, Sunak, and May. I don't think the words were bit part, but I sensed these. I didn't do the bit part prime ministers, the ones that had been in office for 3 minutes.
Well, the thing about my work is that it's I've been, and this is actually talking about the YouTube channel. One of the reasons we love doing the YouTube channel is I've been in an industry in terminal decline. So it's not that they're bit part prime ministers. They weren't. I think Rishi Sunak probably did a pretty good job. He in a difficult circumstance. I think he's probably quite a decent guy. Basically, I haven't mentioned Truss. I mean, they were sort of in and out so quickly, and also, as I said, back in the 90s, I was photographing Blair I photographed him about 4 times within 2 years. And there was a lot more commissions. Magazines, the content, the commissions to go and photograph people were paid for by advertising revenue. That's how printed media works. And now that advertising revenue has gone to pay for Facebook ads or Google ads, because they're much more effectively driven and targeted because of all the way the data is. And so the industry it's shrinking, and therefore it would be dishonest of me to pretend that I'm getting the same amount of commissions. I'm really lucky that I get any commissions, because and especially with AI, that will probably be the final nail in the coffin. Other than for reportage photographs that kind of utilize the essential nature of photography, that it's purely a mechanical method of reproducing reality. Everything else sort of it will be probably done with AI. Even if I'd been if those people had been prime ministers in the 90s, then I might have been commissioned to photograph them. Yeah. But they came and went, especially with Truss, so quickly, and it was during the pandemic that I didn't. You have to sort of wait and hope you'll be commissioned. And there are people that I wouldn't say I'm particularly necessarily proud of my politicians over anyone else, but there are people that I definitely want to photograph. I'm still waiting for, that I've. You wait until a magazine happens to pick up the phone. You're kind of like a cork being tossed around in the sea of who happens to commission you. And so it's wonderful when you get a really decent magazine phoning you up and then saying, do you want to photograph somebody? And do you know what? I really do, because I'm, Ian McEwan, I'm a really big fan of.
Oh, yeah.
In spite of the fact that you're not meant to like him, I do think it would be interesting to photograph Morrissey, because I was a big Smiths fan, and I have photographed Johnny Marr and Andy Warhawk and Mike Joyce. There are just personal people that I'd love to photograph, but I wouldn't put Liz Truss or Richie Sunak on that list of wish lists. You're probably right, but I wouldn't want to disparage them either. I mean, but when you compare them to somebody like Blair, who's so derided now. He won 3. No other Labour politician has been so successful. And also he realised, and I would say this because I'm a centrist, that elections are won on the middle ground. And you have to kind of persuade people on the right to join in, and you have to persuade people rather than this divisive kind of tribal way that politics is going, which is really damaging, I think, and just drives people into silos. And obviously that's sort of definitely catalyzed by social media.
I want to change direction entirely now.
Getting not really talking about photography. I'm getting on my soapbox.
No. The personal nature of this is lovely. I'm celebrating it, and actually that comes across on the YouTube channel. But I do want to change direction. Survivor. It's one of those rare projects where people almost stop talking about the photography. So we're going to do it again, because the humanity is the most important part of that project. It's overwhelming, I think, as well. How did the work begin? Was there one encounter that made you think, I have to do this? This is for me. I need to tell this story.
Yeah, I mean, I got to middle age, and although it's seductive and people are interested, and obviously we've been doing it, people find it interesting to find out what David Beckham was like or whatever. And you can end up monopolizing parties, because you suddenly realize you're holding court, and it's an evening with Harry Borden. And I just thought, ultimately, I think it actually occurred when I was with a documentary photographer called Abby Traylor Smith, and she's the mother of my 4th child. And we were at a party, and she was part of this agency, Panos, and there was another photographer there, and he was sort of like a documentary photographer. And I introduced myself, and I said, hi, I'm Harry. And he said, I know who you are. You photograph famous people. And he didn't mean it in a good way. And actually, it was a bit of an unkind and pious kind of thing to say, to imply that, but I think a lot of documentary photographers are very browned off at the fact that the Sunday Times used to have, all these kind of issues, Biafra or things going along around the world, and they would bring this to the attention of people on a Sunday, but now it's all select portraits. And so, there was a lot of hostility just to the situation generally rather than specifically to me. But I guess it kind of planted a seed, and it made me realize that I wanted to use my skills to an intelligent end, and actually do something that I felt I had skin in the game, that would be a voyage of discovery, that where I was the architect of my own future rather than who happened to commission me. And so I, at that point, got contacted by a guy who was actually running the Royal College of Surgeons. And he asked me to go to lunch with him, and he wanted me to photograph. It would have been a really good project, and I'd still quite like to do it, actually. Yeah. He wanted me to photograph surgeons. Actually, this is my idea, was to photograph these surgeons and then photograph the tools that they kind of had developed.
Great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have made an interesting
Yeah.
little project. Anyway, over lunch, it turned out that he was Jewish, and I just mentioned the fact that my dad was Jewish. He was an atheist. I grew up in Devon, so I never met any Jewish people. I remember I had a friend who was Jewish when I first came to London, and he was in a Jewish football team. And I said, "Oh, well, I like playing football." I said, "I could come," and he said, "No, you're not Jewish because it's matrilineal, so they wouldn't consider you Jewish," which is a bit hardcore. But in any case, I just thought the more I learned about the Holocaust, the more I kind of felt that it was an opportunity for me to produce a body of work that had the potential to be more profound and longer lasting. And also it was a kind of intersection between technology. So before the noughties, we'd all be shooting on film, and I didn't want to do what I'd seen other photographers do, or even Spielberg, which is just set up a studio and then get a load of survivors in and then photograph them against black in a very dramatic way, and then impose some technique on them like I'd done with my early portraits of celebrities. I wanted to go to each person's home and spend a day with them if necessary and talk to them, and then do an environmental portrait. A bit like Martin Parr when he did a whole series about middle class sort of people's lounges and everything like that. I think it was probably influenced by that, because I think those pictures are quite interesting in time as well. And I wanted to use available light as well. And so technically, the fact that suddenly we were now using digital cameras meant that I wouldn't have to invest a huge amount in film and processing, because I photographed 200 people all around the world. And I also wouldn't, have to go through the process of digitizing it, which the whole thing would have been suddenly much, much cheaper.
Yeah.
And also digital cameras around 2007, the sensors started to get better than film in terms of resolution and so on. And so, I started the project with photographing some people in North London mainly. I leveraged my celebrity portraits, and so I did an interview with the Jewish Chronicle about the fact that I photographed Baroness Thatcher or whoever, and explained that I was interested in photographing survivors, because these people these people had got to the point earlier in their lives, immediately after the war, they hadn't really wanted to talk about what they'd experienced. They obviously might have had PTSD. They were kind of wanting to get on with their lives and draw a veil over this horrific experience. And they were getting towards the ends of the end. I mean, more than, I'd say 2/3 of the people are no longer with us now. Their book was published in 2017, but the last pictures were taken around 2011. And so it was just a little window where technology came together to make it very cheap. And these people were more open to telling their stories before they died. So quite often when I photographed these people, they would give me a copy of their self-published autobiography, because they suddenly realized they wanted to get their story out.
Yeah.
So it kind of grew. I photographed people in London, as I said. Then I went and did an interview online with the Australian Jewish News. And so I had a load of people in Melbourne. There's a huge community of Jewish people and Holocaust survivors in Melbourne. And I had people contacting me, because also I didn't want to be bothering these people. I wanted people to feel invested and interested in being part of this project. And it's become a huge community. And after that, an Australian woman who's become a good friend, Miriam, got in touch and asked if she could help. She's a writer and a producer, and she lives in Sydney. And she suggested going to Israel. So we went to Israel, and then we finished off in New York and traveled around America. And she sort of gave the whole project more impetus. She was the granddaughter of survivors herself, and she's married to an Israeli guy who spoke Hebrew, so that made it easier to navigate your way around Israel and so on. And so suddenly there was this body of work that as Martin Parr said, a substantial body of work with real depth and authority. That was his quote when he reviewed the book. And it was just a question of getting it published. And so I picked the right subject. It's surprisingly easy to get a book published. So it's not a niche photography book that only has 500 copies. I think they printed about 10,000 copies. Yeah. And it's been sort of released all around the world. And it was published by Hachette, which is not. I mean, the woman who worked on it used to work for Phaidon, so the production values are fantastic. They did a brilliant job. The design was great. They hired a Holocaust historian to fact check because the back third is all biographies of my subjects, and it's been a wonderful exercise, and something that I feel more proud of than any of the celebrity portraits, because I insisted with Hachette that they post a copy of the book to every person who's in the book, and so that would have cost them a significant amount of money, because they were sent all around the world, and so everybody has a copy of the book, and it's part of their family folklore, and it will be something that's probably treasured and passed down through generations.
Extraordinary project, very potent. A single dad, that's a real attempt to challenge a stereotype, isn't it? I know that you have personal skin in the game in this one, of course, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, I don't believe in sort of the notion of cultural appropriation or anything like that. I think you should be able to do a project on whatever you want, and it's certainly, if I'm doing a project on gay men or something like that, I'm not a member of that community, but I might do a really good job because I actually have an original perspective. But similarly, I might have an advantage if I was gay and I was part of the scene and everything. So although I sort of think you should do a project on whatever you want, and then these projects should be individually judged according to their own merit, objectively, in my case, I do find it easier to do projects that I am personally invested in, and that's why I'm a fan of in fact, I love Tracy Emin's work, because it's so personal, and she really you really get a sense of the first person kind of confessional aspect of things. And so I got divorced in 2009. It was like a bomb going off, it was it turned out to be a great opportunity. A catastrophe, sometimes, without being glib, can be an opportunity. And my ex and I, I've done another book which came as a result of Single Dad on divorce. And when we publicised that in the Observer, they commissioned me to do a self-portrait with my ex, because we get on, we're best friends.
You do have a good relationship, don't you? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I have a really good relationship with all my exes. But for me, the biggest and most concerning thing, because I had really good relationships with my kids, because I had 3, Polly, Fred and Oscar, at the time, was that it would impact on them, and that it might affect their ability to have relationships, and in a psychological sense, in attachment theory, the trauma that of their parents splitting up might sort of down the line kind of impact on them. And I'm sure it probably has to an extent. Or it maybe in a positive way, because they're able to then see me and their mum become friends, and our relationship reconfigure, and realise that, and be okay with the fact that the universal law of change, everything is constantly in flux, things change, things are constantly evolving. And so I was asked, I had this idea in my head. And then serendipitously, a charity called Dad's House got in touch, and they just asked me out of the blue. I think they contacted the Royal Photographic Society, and they recommended me as a good photographer. They didn't know anything about my personal circumstances, and they asked me if I would give away a portrait session to raise awareness for this charity, which helps single dads through navigate the unique, singular problems that single dads might have. Because so quite often, if you're the main carer and you're male, a lot of the support infrastructure networks at the school gate, a female, and you can be maybe a bit ostracized or find it a bit difficult. I mean, if you look at Motherland, the comedy, I don't know if you've seen it.
I have,
the guy, the single dad, or the guy that's the stay-at-home dad, is kind of depicted as slightly risible character, and more generally, men are kind of seen as maybe quite rightly, because it's been sort of thousands of years of the patriarchy, now sort of seen as ridiculous. I mean, Homer Simpson is sort of seen as an archetype of fatherhood. So the book was, I'm not a man's rights, I'm not part of the manosphere or a man's rights activist. But I certainly think that we need to value fathers in their children's lives. And to that end, I happened to, like with on Survivor, I happened to be photographing Howard Jacobson, and I got him to write the foreword to Survivor. And similarly, I was photographing Bob Geldof for The Guardian, and I'd shot him before for Time magazine. And I basically realized after the second shoot that I'd photographed Peaches, his daughter, who died, and I hadn't made that connection. Yeah. And so I had his management's details, so I just had a load of prints made for my shoot with Peaches, and I sent them to Bob via his agent. And then he emailed me. He said, "People don't realize that's all I have." Wow. He was just so grateful, and he remembered me talking about my project about these single parent dads, and he asked if he could help, and so he wrote a really good foreword to the book. The book actually happened because initially I was just taking these random portraits of these single parent dads, and I was kind of falling out of love with the project. I was just thinking, yeah, they're okay pictures, but you didn't really get a sense of the stories, or it didn't feel very like there was a connection. And with Survivor, I got each person to write a sentence in their own handwriting, which further personalized the portraits. Yeah. And at that moment, I think they won a prize in the Association of Photographers, the best series of these portraits. And Russ O'Connell, who's the picture editor at the Sunday Times magazine, he wanted to run them as a gallery with an interview with Rio Ferdinand, who'd been made a single parent dad. Of course, yes. So I sort of sold him a license because obviously that's how you kind of can do these projects, is you can then maybe sell subsequent license for people to run them. And during that process, Russ said, of course, we need caption information. And this is the beauty part. I don't know why I didn't do this. I basically just emailed all my dads, and I just asked them two questions: how they became a single parent dad and what they love about fatherhood. And I got the emails back, and it was during the pandemic, and suddenly it was a collaboration, just like Survivor. And I sent, during the pandemic, I was sort of sitting there in my pajamas, I made a PDF of it and sent it off. And then Hoxton Mini Press, which is more of a niche publisher than Hachette, said they would publish it. And I'm very proud of that book. They did a really nice job, and it's a celebration of fatherhood, but it's also about I think, conciliation and letting go of your ego and doing what's best for the children, because all their stories are different, but quite often most of the dads didn't want, they're very reluctant initially to be involved because they didn't want to upset the apple cart, because they really wanted to have a convivial relationship with their exes. And that's why it's lovely that, I'm doing the channel with Fred. I've used Florian, my youngest, in projects, and I have another project with my daughter called First Drawn, which consists of her illustrations. So she draws
every time you meet, you do this, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, for me, that they are kind of, I don't want to sound like a born-again Christian. So
you take a picture of her and she draws a picture of you, doesn't she?
Yeah, yeah. I actually do think, it's nice to have this creative outlet and have status, and people think and it's provided for me materially, but nothing is of any consequence if your children don't kind of think that you're okay and want to hang out with you. And to me, it's a blessing that a 30-year-old woman, my daughter, who works for Meta, and in South America at the moment, surfing is like as cool as you could possibly imagine, wants to hang out with old dad and do a project with her dad. It's a really cool thing. So and then that led on to Alain de Botton. He liked the Survivor book, and then he really liked Single Dad, and then he asked me to do a book on divorce, which was a similar kind of format, but really kind of exploring the challenges, but also the opportunity for joy and recalibration of people's lives, of something that more than half of people who get married will have to
encounter. Yes, yeah.
And my sincere thanks to Harry Borden, who is back next week. Yes, the conversation. Yes, it does, pups. The conversation continues next week. What's the matter? What's the matter? Did you want to say something? This is not the time to go quiet. I'll run. Come on then. Don't do that at my ankles. You'll get a reputation. Did you like that big Shire horse? Did you think, what the F-stop is that? It was huge, wasn't he? Beautiful Shire horse. Beautiful English, British, UK Shire horse. Look, there we go. There we go. They're nice, aren't they? Getting a bit shiny now, so I think we should head back to get you some shade. Although it's quite good along here, because most of the walk along the towpath on this side of the river, at any rate, quite a lot of it, is in shade. Come on, pups, this way. I've actually got another small adventurette. Oh, here comes a cyclist. Pups, come over here. If it's not Shire horses, it's cyclists. Come here. Sit down. Sit. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you.
Enjoy your ride. Come on, pups. Where were we? Oh, yes, another adventure. I'm not sure. It'll be a photo adventure, that's for sure. It'll be a great sketchbooking opportunity because I'm a long time on this heritage train. Our Thomas, our youngest, you know he loves aeroplanes and trains. He's treated his dad, so he has, to I was bowled over by this. What a lovely Father's Day present. To a train ride out to the West Country, aboard some wonderful classic carriages. We'll be having cream tea aboard the train. How very civilised, very very pathé and civilised. And it's being hauled by a Battle of Britain class locomotive. Oh, honestly, what a treat. We don't want it to be too sunny though, because if it's too hot, apparently it can't run, and they have to be pulled by a classic diesel. It's not quite the same, is it? Ready? Here's a stick, pups. Stick of the day. Stick of the day. Oh, blimey. Almost brained you. Apologise, that was heavier than I thought. We have a wonderful community that listens to this show every week, and then we have an extended family too called the Extra Milers. Those who support the show each month with a kind donation that keeps this show on the road, as it were. Without you, we would simply not be here. Honestly, we would not. And to thank you, there is an additional show each week called The Extra Mile, where I walk with more of your letters or personal thoughts on the path. There's a chance sometimes to appear on the podcast, because our Extra Milers can be part of that show. And we've popped a few new things into it of late. That's the place where Halfway to Maybe now lives. And this week's Halfway to Maybe, it talks about changing your mind. All will become clear when you hear it. And I have an admission to make about my conversation with Harry. Shan't say more, you'll have to listen to The Extra Mile. And, or plus, there's a new feature called Moments. It was a moment of inspiration, so it was, featuring a guest who's on in 2 weeks' time, called Wayne, who I've talked about already, Wayne Critchlow. Morning. I love seeing barges go past. Yes, he's back in a couple of weeks' time. He's photographed and written a book about the Notting Hill Carnival, but he's the very first person to face questions from a few that I've written called Moments, because we work in moments, don't we? Photography is about moments, a moment in time.
On this week's Extra Mile.
A moment you wished you'd have photographed.
You know what? I don't have many moments where I think, damn, I wish I had my camera, because I then rely on my memory and what I've seen with my own eyes, and hoping that my brain and my memory would last long enough for that particular scene and frame to live in my mind, right, and not just be, in a screen or in a box or whatever, because I think that also, in the world of screens, of electronics, etc., we are losing some of our connections with what is natural.
How can I hear this extra mile thing then, Neil? I'm glad you asked me. Just go to the website, photowalk.show, and you'll see the extra mile link. The best thing is, as soon as you are a member, you get access to hundreds of additional shows and our monthly live Zoom meetup, and you can listen to all those shows, new and archive, on whatever app you use to listen to your podcasts usually. We've had the extra mile for quite a while, and it goes up and down in numbers. It's on a bit of a downward trajectory at the moment. I don't mind sharing that with you. We have an honesty thing between us, don't we? And honestly, so thank you, the extra milers who keep us here. I know sometimes that people's situations change. It's not always easy, but roughly for the price of one of those fancy smart-ass coffees that you get in Starbucks or name or place other coffee chain here, you can help support this show and keep us here, walking with you week after week. And we have the first zine, of course. There are only now 30 physical copies left. It's called Reflections. You'll find that on the website as well. And this edition, I go on a photographic adventure in Bangladesh. Oh, just hang on. Go underneath the branches there. And there's a guest feature about a place we walk often, where we walk together, Greenham Common. And why a photo walk could just be life-saving, certainly life-changing. Now, in a moment, we have our play-out song, which is our tune to amble with a little further along the path. Today it's called Orion by Shelley Archer. It's actually a very haunting song, a very reflective song about paying attention to this life, this world, even at its darkest times. So that's our play-out song, which we'll hear in a moment. So we need to do one last thing, don't we, pups? Hey? Are you ready for this? Are you ready?
It's the last letter of the show. The last letter of the show.
And it's from Paul Eves. And I gotta be honest, Paul, I wondered initially where you were going with this. But it does make sense in not long. Dear Neil, very formal. Dear Neil, thank you for the company on the trails. Although I have to say my listening is usually done at home during the more mundane moments before I get out with a camera to walk my dog, Maisie. It was during the drudgery of one such normal day that you entirely inspired me to write. And this is what I wrote. Dear manufacturers of washing machines, could you stop making the tune at the end of the cycle quite so cheerful? You've watched me stuff everything from my muddy walking pants to coffee-stained shirts into this drum, only to announce with the enthusiasm of somebody who's just won the lottery that my socks are now clean, and I'm finding it a bit too much. A single, dignified beep would probably do. Or perhaps that's the point. Maybe somebody decided years ago that we'd all hear enough gloomy news and sounds during the day, so the washing machine should celebrate the small victories of life. Another load done, another ordinary task ticked off your list. Du-du-dung! So maybe this is a bit like photography. I have a feeling you may be shoehorning this in. Bear with me, Neil. All right. We use it, photography that is, to record the familiar creak of the stairs, do we? Step number 3 in our house, down to the basement, is the one that makes the most noise, or the kettle coming to a boil, or Maisie waiting excitedly by the back door, whimpering before we go out for the walk. Perhaps even that stupidly cheerful washing machine. The funny thing is, a photograph can't record a sound. And yet, years later, one picture of some stairs, or a kettle, or our dog Maisie, will bring the whole soundtrack of home flooding right on back. Yours, waiting for the spin cycle, Paul.
Just like a flower that's hidden away from the sun. You'll always remember the dark and the damage it's done. You climbed up the stairs and woke everyone with your dreaming. And Daddy was mad, the attic was packed with his demons. Looking for proof of the ghosts that you knew that were real. You sat on the roof and waited for stars to reveal. And watching for hours, Orion above you was shining. You stared at the sky and couldn't explain why you're crying. Collection of stones and small animal bones from the moon. You wished for the firefly light in the dark of your room, and stepped on with dread. The heat of the pavement was burning. Awaken the dead, your feet on the earth as it's turning.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.